You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 74 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanthatracks.com. My name's Mark, I'm one of your co-hosts, and this week, joining me as always, is my main man from the Midlands, and the only dude who, if you chucked him out of a Jedi Vector, probably flap his arms first before he tried to use the Force. That's right, it's Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing?
Don't ever underestimate the power of the flap, as I once said to somebody who was falling out of a Jedi Vector. I'm very well, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm very well, thank you. It's is it snowing where you are? Because it's snowing down here.
It's very Hothly, I would say, which is kind of ironic because StarWars.com have just launched this new Adventures Across the Galaxy initiative where they're picking a planet every month, and January's planet, weirdly, is Hoth. Why they wouldn't pick Tatooine, I don't know. They've picked Hoth.
Well, I wonder what they're going to pick for February, because February's still cold. I guess they're just going to go around and do all the snow planets. So what's that? Hoth, Ilum. That's the only two I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, they should. Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you go seasonal, I mean, obviously June and, like Geonosis, Tatooine and stuff like that. But if you're doing merchandising, and they've picked 12 planets, so you're kind of limited. I mean, I suppose you're thinking Naboo and Endor, Coruscant and Tatooine and Hoth, and you pick your obvious ones. Bespin, Dagobah is a good one, isn't it? So there's certain ones. I suppose Dagobah's a bit wet and miserable, isn't it? That could be sort of early in the year. I don't know. I don't know how far down the line they'll want to go with that. They might go back to Tatooine. There's plenty to talk about on that planet, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there's lots of sand, and you know how we like sand.
We love sand. We love sand. It's a very special episode today because, believe it or not, it is. Believe it or not only is it the 200th episode of all Fantha Tracks Radio podcasts, it's also your first anniversary, so happy birthday, Mark.
Ooh, has it been a year?
It's been a year.
Wow.
27th of January last year, your first episode arrived on Fantha Tracks Radio, yes. Episode 26 of Making Tracks.
Wow. Kicking and screaming. It was dragged out of the abyss like, I don't know. Wow, I suppose it has been. What a year it's been, or hasn't been, I suppose, depending on which way you want to look at it. Normally,
by now, 12 months down the line, we'd have met up, we'd have done Rebel Legion bashes, and we'd have been to MCM and all over the place, and there'd have been a celebration, and we'd have had loads to talk about. We've not had any lack of things to talk about. We never do. But yeah, we've not had a chance to have a normal. I'm doing the little air quotes, but I think we've made the best of it. I think we've done pretty well.
I think so. I mean, to be honest, I guess the listeners can be the judge of that, really. I mean, but
was that listeners with an S or listener?
Yes. That's listeners plural, because I know both my mum and my dad do listen from time to time.
That's good news. Good news. Good.
There's two of them. Yeah. When I first joined, as you had been doing, like maybe bi-monthly or.
We were sort of doing it every other week, but then we'd got conventions to go to, so we were getting content from, like I say, from MCM and Star Wars Fan Fun Day and, all the other places that Fantha would go to, plus trips to the States, New York Comic Con. So we were sort of content rich.
Yeah.
We didn't need to or have to do what we call a studio episode every week. But as it's gone on, we've hit our stride and we've hit our rhythm, and it's now a weekly thing, isn't it? And I think when conventions start again, we'll try and keep to that weekly rhythm, a studio ep, or maybe we'll catch up at a convention and we'll do a live show, a live episode for a convention somewhere. I cannot wait for that. I think, one, it's going to be fun just talking to you face to face, because I know you're putting faces at me right now, but I can't see it. But then, to go to these events and be able to, meet the guests and do some interviews together with people and chat to your fellow Rebel Legion members and Mando Mercs and 501st and all the other people we can talk to. I think it's going to be great fun. Looking forward to all that.
Me too.
Hi, this is Gareth Edwards, director of the best standalone Star Wars film since Caravan of Courage, called Rogue One. You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
Liam Neeson did a TV appearance recently whereby he pulled out his episode 1 Qui-Gon Jinn lightsaber.
Now, Liam, we've been doing a thing on the show called a Late Late Show and Tell, where we ask our guests if they would share something with us from their home that we may otherwise never get to see. Do you have anything you would like to share with us this evening?
Actually, James, I do. Oh, it happens to be sitting beside me. Now, this piece of wood, it looks like an ordinary piece of wood. This has been to Tatooine and back many, many times. If I turn it this way, it'll show a certain lightsaber that I used in the film The Phantom Menace that was originally going to be called The Beginning. And it says on it, October 97. So that was my lightsaber as Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi Master. Just plugging that.
Wow.
So that's the one. And everybody thinks, oh yeah, you turn it on with just your thought, right? I said, no, it's a red button.
It's like a remote control. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
If you were to get a screen use prop from a Star Wars film, Mark Mulcaster, birthday boy, what would you pick if you could pick anything? I'll clarify by saying it's got to be something you can hold in your hand. You can't say, the full-scale Millennium Falcon. It's got to be something you can hold in your hand. A prop that you see on screen or a model that was seen on screen that, something you can physically carry. What would you have?
It's difficult because there's so many bits and bobs, isn't there? It would probably have to be something fairly iconic. So probably got to weigh up what you could get away with swiping, which possibly wouldn't get missed. If we're talking about it not being given to you in the same way I think Liam's lightsaber was given to him, like presented on a plaque.
Sure, yes.
So if this was something slightly swipeable, I would probably say either something like, because I think a lightsaber would be a little bit too obvious if you were to do it from the original trilogy, and I think they probably only made a few, so they'd know where they were at any one time. But maybe something like a Stormtrooper blaster, or even an X-Wing pilot helmet, like one of the stunt ones. And the stunt helmets were the X-Wing pilot helmets, which basically were just plain white with the blue decals and the kind of a smoked black kind of visors. That would be my thing. It doesn't necessarily need to be like from a main character, as much as it would be quite cool to walk off with, I don't know, Princess Leia's gold bikini from Jedi. But
Sure.
I suppose that's the thing, Memento's a deep connection to maybe what you were working on. So if I was working on Hoth, maybe like a Hoth blaster or like one of those cool snow caps that I know Dave Tree's quite fond of.
Yeah.
Or potentially, again, if I was working on Return of the Jedi in Endor, it would probably be something like a blaster or something, because I think those are quite cool, and those are something where you could quite easily mount, and it's fairly obvious what it is, So, yeah, how about you? What would you pick?
I like your thought process of, it depends on what film you're working on, if you were working on the film, or what your favourite film is. First thing that came into my head when I thought about this, and it's something I'm actually hoping to track down for real, and if they don't make a mass market version, then just somehow find somebody who might have these things for real. The sabak scene from Solo, the sabak chips, because I just love looking at the table. You've got, what you would consider your regular, like you would see a calamari flan in Mando, that sort of thing. There's regular stuff and regular coins and like Canto Bite type chips and things like that, but also the wooden bamboo style, very rustic looking currency, which is every bit as valid as any other currency. So it just looked like they really went to town designing this stuff, sort of throwing in all these really unique looking things that these people considered currency, because basically, we just chop trees down and pulp them into our currency. I know paper money is now becoming more plastic money, but you know what I'm getting at? It's that sort of logic. So for me, it would be fairly big hands, like a nice grab full of those from the sabak scene from Solo. I think that would be the thing I'd pick. But if I was on the set, I know me, I love all my little fiddly things. So I'll be like crew patches and crew pins and little odds and sods. I've got a few little bits and bobs, but it will be anything small, like you say, something that fits in the palm of your hand. For me, doesn't need to be a great big piece. So if I was going to pick a model, let's say from a film, I'd get the Millennium Falcon that you see on the back of the Star Destroyer in Empire, because it's about the size of a 50p piece. So I'd be going for something really small and dinky like that, just to have it in a display box, just to have it there. Sure, it'd be great to have a costume, none of which would fit me because I'm an odd shaped bugger, but something like that would be really cool to have on display. But I think just something small you can actually pick up and sort of somebody can hold it in their hand and feel like they're interacting with it to a degree. I think that would be fun.
Hi, this is John Morton from The Empire Strikes Back, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So the main man over at Marvel, Kevin Feige, has had a long chat with one of the journalists from Collider. Part of the conversation was touching on his involvement with the upcoming Untitled Star Wars project, and Kevin was basically asked whether or not his involvement with Star Wars would extend beyond the one project. I think to a lot of people's surprise and maybe disappointment, Feige was pretty clear in his response by saying no, not at all.
I'm pleased he's involved because he's done such a stellar job with Marvel, Disney Marvel, and he'd done other Marvel stuff before that. I think he worked on the Raimi Spider-Man films, and he had some involvement with the X-Men. So, he's been in and around the superhero genre for 20 years now, and he's younger than me. So he knows what he's doing. He knows how to produce a film. I don't think there's a clunker amongst those Marvel movies, and certainly with WandaVision coming out now, with which he's obviously heavily involved, that's been fantastic as well. So for him to bring that skill and his vision as a self-confessed big Star Wars fan, Feige has done so many incredible movies, and I'm thinking not only the quality of the films and the quality of the cast and the production and all of that which he oversees, and clearly he has a very high watermark, if you like, that he's built for himself or developed for himself. He knows how to thread a story together, because that Infinity Saga didn't happen by accident. The breadcrumbs been dropped over a long time, years and years. And if you're watching WandaVision right now, for example, and see how it's feeding back to earlier Marvel movies are getting mentioned, and it all starts to come together, that to me is world building on a grand level. If you read the Avengers comic, you get 12 issues of the Avengers. If that's the one comic you get 12 issues of that a year. We're about to get 9 episodes of WandaVision. Basically, Marvel are making live action comics now, and I think it's fantastic. If he can take that skill across to do a Star Wars film, awesome. If that Star Wars film does anything like Marvel money, billion plus, I can't imagine Disney saying, well, thanks for doing that one film, Kevin. Off you go. Despite what he says in the interview, and I don't discredit what the interviewer said, because he's been interviewing him for years, and he, like he says, if he says something, then that's it. On a level of project like a Star Wars film, there's no way Feige is going to give anything away. It's easier to deny and say no, I'm just doing this, that's it. What else is he going to say to a direct question? It can't be vague, it can't be ambiguous. He's got to cut it off at the root in that moment. And if he turns out to be wrong, then who loses? So to me, I don't think that Feige saying no, outside of the Disney Investors Day that we had recently, with all the stuff that was mentioned there and all the things he's got coming up with Marvel, of which there's multitudes, he's busy man. I don't think there's any currency in stoking up rumours. He doesn't need to stoke up rumours. You look at last week in Marvel, it's Chris Evans is coming back, and first 2 episodes of WandaVision, and Charlie Cox has filmed his scenes for Spider-Man 3, and there's enough actual news without faking news. So I think if Kevin Feige does drag him out, knock him down Star Wars film that people just flip for, there's no way they won't have him back. Again, because of his producing skills and talents and involvement in telling a story, Star Wars needs that right now. It needs the long view. It needs somebody to sit down now and plan out the next X amount of years, which of course is what they do. He's proved he's the best in the industry at doing that. So I don't believe this is a one and only deal. What do you think?
I mean, if you look at his IMDb schedule at the moment, he's got a lot on his plate. There's a lot of stuff. At the Disney Investor Call, they didn't just announce a shed ton of Star Wars, they announced a shed ton of Marvel productions and everything else. Potentially he's just playing his cards close to his chest. It's probably kind of be fairly savvy of him to maybe not say, oh yes, definitely, because just take Rian Johnson, for instance. They came out and said that Rian Johnson was going to do a whole new trilogy, and where's that been for the last few years? And that's obviously I think a parting of the ways from both Lucasfilm and Rian also. But potentially it could just come down to the fact that he may not want to write himself into a corner like that and say, yeah, I'm definitely going to be working on more stuff in the future with Lucasfilm and Star Wars, and then obviously 10 years or 15 years down the line, he hasn't, because he's been busy working on Marvel stuff or other projects, and he's he hasn't had the time to kind of get back to it. Because I would be surprised, I think Lucasfilm and Disney, more importantly, if a Kevin Feige produced or directed or written film or series is really strong and does really well in the box office or on streaming, they'd be crazy, wouldn't they, just to only make it a one and done single kind of like story. Unless, of course, he's producing something in a similar line to Rogue One, whereby really, for all intents and purposes, that is a single standalone film, and by the end of it, there's no way you could really continue and have subsequent sequels with those characters in mind.
Yeah, maybe it's just to get the monkey off his back because he's such a huge Star Wars fan, and who else would you give that latitude to? And this is where I think fandom will get their knickers in a twist to a degree, because obviously at the moment Kathleen Kennedy is the boss, and she's at the top of the tree. You look back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is 40 years old in June, and you think there was Lucas who'd done Star Wars, done Graffiti, done THX. There's Spielberg, he's done Close Encounters, he's done 1941, he's done Jaws, the biggest movie of all time until Star Wars came out. Two absolute titans of the game. Friends who work together and find a way to work together, where you look at Raiders and you go, it's just as much George as it is Stephen, and vice versa. They were on the par. And I think if you bring Kevin Feige into Star Wars, if it's a one-off event, it's produced by Kevin Feige, he probably worked on the story, he's working with Lucasfilm. If it's that one thing, Rogue One's a great analogy, actually. If it's just that one-off storyline and it's done at the end, and if Disney Plus want to spin off, or the animation department want to spin off and do stories with those characters, prequels like an Andor type thing, or whatever it might be, great. If he comes in and has an idea and sits down with the higher-ups at Lucasfilm, Michelle Redwan and Kathleen Kennedy, and sits down with the story group and they all start chewing ideas over, or it's a Jon Favreau situation where he comes to them and goes, I've got this great idea and I've already written the first 4 episodes, but this is The Mandalorian, and they go, wow, that's awesome. His skills are so obvious and so evident, to not use them will be insane. And I don't think he would expect to walk into the Star Wars world and be top of the tree like he is at Marvel. But I do think that Lucasfilm could comfortably come up with a scenario, or for want of a better word, a job title that gives him that autonomy, so he can still be Kevin Feige and do the Kevin Feige thing and make it work for Star Wars. Not that Star Wars haven't already got it working. Look at the money in the bank. Look at everything we're getting. It's working. But if he can come in and do his thing, I don't see why that couldn't happen, but not leave Marvel. I don't see him leaving Marvel. I think he's a lifer there. I think he'll be like a Stan Lee at 80 still doing stuff personally.
Could be, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I don't necessarily know a huge amount about Kevin Feige as a guy, or even actually beyond Marvel. And looking at his 70-odd producing credits on IMDb, it's it is pretty much all Marvel, I think. Yeah. I mean, it is. It goes back to like him being an associate producer in 2000 for X-Men. And all the Marvel films that we kind of forget are Marvel films, so like Daredevil, Punisher, Hulk, Elektra, and all this stuff. There's a lot there before we kind of get to what we now consider the true kind of MCU. Yeah. He could be like a story consultant, potentially, or, something like that. But I think it would greatly depend upon what he wants to do. And I think it's a good point what you said about maybe it's just him just trying to kind of scratch that itch. Maybe there's been enough people at Marvel and in his personal life, and maybe even actually higher up in Disney who are like, I think you should think about doing a Star Wars film as well. And like you said, there are the classic, I'm a Star Wars fan and I've seen it loads, and forget that Return of the Jedi came after Empire Strikes Back, and all these people who use it almost as a way to kind of try and keep in touch with their fan base. And then there's the true kind of die-in-the-wool Star Wars fans who it really shaped their careers and influenced them heavily. People like Jon Favreau, and I think people like Kevin Feige as well can fall under that banner. I think whatever he does and whatever era he was to write something for, I think he's going to do it in a very authentic kind of way that will feel Star Wars through and through, but obviously will have that slight Kevin Feige touch to it.
That's the thing, isn't it? If you've got somebody like that at Disney, and you look at the Kathleen Kennedy situation that as people have just talked about ad nauseum for years and years and years, and she's going nowhere. She's been in that job nearly 10 years now. 2012, I think she came in early 2012. So it's 2021 now. So 10 years at the helm. She's not getting any younger. Who is? You got to factor that into the conversation as well. But you look back at Kathleen Kennedy's producing record, and it's unparalleled, really. Probably the only producer you could put close to her would be Kevin Feige. If you look at the projects and look at the films. He's got Marvel where he wants it right now. It's about to expand with the Disney Plus era into Phase 4 and all the other stuff, and they're way ahead of planning there. They must be, because that's just how they couldn't have planned the Infinity Saga any other way, could they, without planning way ahead? He probably needs something to freshen things up. He probably needs something else to put his mind to outside of this, just to keep himself sharp. And because it's Star Wars and he must look at Star Wars, and he would love to be involved, clearly, it's happening and it's known, it's no surprise. I think it's a good thing for him to get involved and bring that skill set across. But again, going back to the interview, he says no. He says, no, this is it. That's it. Done. I've got enough other stuff on my plate. He feels to me like down the line at some point, he'll elevate up the ranks, not just of Marvel. He can't really get much higher at Marvel, but at Disney. Like they brought John Lasseter from Pixar over to do Disney animation and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It feels like Feige's done such a tremendous job. Why would you not want to use that skill in the broader church of House of Mouse, if you want to use that phrase?
Well, that's it, isn't it? Let's for argument's say that, yes, Kathleen Kennedy retires because I think she's like 67, so maybe this is where she's thinking she's going to run out for the last part of her career. Would Kevin Feige want to basically do what is almost considered a lateral move across? Because you kind of imagine Marvel and Lucasfilm are probably considered similar scale companies, whereas really, surely the execs at Disney are thinking, Kevin Feige's the kind of guy that we want to run our Disney studios, so we want him to move up to that higher position. But then, let's not discredit maybe what actually Kevin wants as well, because he might actually not want to kind of progress further up the Disney hierarchy, because obviously we know what happens sometimes when you do get that promotion. You get that one promotion too many and you're now removed from a thing that actually you do enjoy. Suddenly you won't necessarily be producing and making Marvel films. You've got to worry about everything else, the animation side, and this annoying company called Lucasfilm that seems to be churning stuff out as well, and everything else, which actually then becomes more like a managerial job and less about actual creating and story creative possibilities.
It's Captain Kirk being promoted to Admiral, isn't it? You want to be back at, at the helm of the ship, don't you?
Yeah, or even Han Solo becoming legit.
Yeah.
Or going legit like he did in the EU. It's kind of like he wants to be out there amongst the thick of it.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So with the arrival of the High Republic, we have another era, a new era in the Star Wars timeline. It's the first time in the canon era we've gone way before The Phantom Menace. And so to make sense of that in the timeline, Lucasfilm and Disney have decided to redefine the timeline into 6 distinct eras, I should say. So you kick off with the High Republic, there's the Fall of the Jedi, the Reign of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, New Republic, and Rise of the First Order. All fairly straightforward. I think in the canon era, you went right back to Dawn of the Jedi, you were going back millennia. You obviously had your OT, your PT, and then your New Jedi Order sort of pushing on New Republic era. But now here we have the High Republic, of course, which is a couple of 100 years before. And then they've broke it into these separate sections, obviously dropping the films and the forthcoming TV series into it. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a good idea to break it into eras like this? It makes the story quite easy to sort of define, but by the same token, they seem to change these eras quite regularly and it can get a bit messy. What do you think?
In principle, it makes a lot of sense, and I think these eras are clearly defined. I know they tried to make an effort to change their timeline. Before, from the expanded universe, we used to kind of mark everything by the Battle of Yavin, so it was either like 10 years after the Battle of Yavin or 15 years before the Battle of Yavin. But then did they try to change it to like the
Starkiller Base?
The Starkiller Base incident. That's really confused the hell out of me, because obviously everybody knows when everything is pretty much set from Star Wars. And I suppose the logical sense behind that was actually, well, we've just arbitrarily picked that battle, but why didn't we pick the fall of the Empire or the creation of the Empire or something like that? And in fact, actually, I can remember I think it's Dark Force Rising, Timothy Zahn uses his own calendar to create the chronology, and that was based around when Emperor Palpatine came into power, which I guess makes kind of sense. It's kind of like, as you could imagine for something like a Republic, as things are so old, potentially go on for like thousands and tens of thousands of years, you would have different dynasties and different eras along that way. So that kind of makes sense. This is quite a condensed way of doing it, but this is more for us, more for the consumer, who we are now getting back into that stage. And I've started to see it creep in a little bit with the release of the High Republic, where people are like, I don't know where I should begin. Where should I begin? I want to read Star Wars books, but where should I begin? And how does this one relate to that? And what's this thing called Legends? And how does Legends relate to this? And it's kind of, it is complicated. And as with anything, any kind of large story universe, and in this case, galaxy, it's going to be complicated to introduce people. But obviously, if they're going to do these kind of big publishing initiatives like the High Republic, then that's a good point to start, because it's a clearly defined era that actually has no real bearing on subsequent stories already out there. I think it's good. I think it makes sense. And like you said, the eras are fairly well defined. Obviously, because there isn't any real publishing after Rise of Skywalker, they haven't kind of created another era for that yet. So we only go up to that, don't we? Rise of the First Order.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. The way you've sort of framed that, in that it is a publishing initiative, because obviously at the start of the books they like to put their timeline in, and so this, as you say, gives the High Republic some sort of grounding in the timeline. But also I think it's a little bit of, like you say, some people might come into Star Wars now and go, well, where's the best place to start? And you make a great point about the High Republic, because it's all being written, they've smartly set it a few centuries before, so a couple of hundred years before, so that's fine. So, they can sort of feed in little element, like we talked about before, like they did with Galaxy's Edge. So now all of a sudden everybody in Star Wars, Black Spire gets mentioned in Solo, so, different things get mentioned in books and comics, so it kind of beds it in, like Maz's castle in Force Awakens kind of got retrofitted into things, and that's okay, that's cool, it's a location and it's a place we can go, and as long as they don't overdo it. I think issue 9 or 10 of Star Wars mentioned Starlight Squadron as an X-Wing group, so that was kind of cool. So just little things like that. They can't retrofit too much, because none of what happens in the High Republic got mentioned in the films. But then you can, like, the Great Disaster and all these different things that are happening. It's part of Star Wars history. So that's smart. But you look at that, and on one hand, it's very handy for a reader. Like you say, if you're starting fresh and you've never read anything, why not start with Light of the Jedi and work your way through chronologically if you can? There's no reason why not.
That's an undertaking.
It's a heck of an undertaking. And you mentioned Legends, that's another story entirely, and things from Legends keep dribbling in via Mando, we've got all the other shows, so I think more of that will start feeding in. But I think there's also an aspect of it in that, for example, we know that the Dawn of the Jedi era, we know the Old Republic era and the game's still going on. All the other things that have happened way in the past, not so much talking about legacy, which is in the future, because that very much felt like sort of hypothesis, what if. It didn't feel necessarily this is definitely what's going to happen. Not to me anyway, because there was such a gap as well from some sort of where we'd got at sort of Crucible era right the way ahead to Legacy. But in the past, all the planets still exist. Kind of think these things happened, but they've not defined them yet. And yet you look at this timeline and it is fairly tight. It's a couple of 100 years, isn't it? It's fairly tight, because that fits the narrative right now for books and films and comics that we're getting right now. There is an aspect that worries me in that, and you said it, you don't want to scare off new readers. It's Star Trek conundrum. I mentioned Trek a minute ago, but it's a similar thing. A new fan comes into Star Trek and they've just had their 800th episode. Like near the end of season 3 of Discovery was the 800th episode of Trek. I think including the films, the animation and everything, it was 800 episodes. That's daunting to think, I've got to watch 800 episodes. Where do I start? And Trek are tackling a similar scenario at the moment about how do you bring new people in and how do you not make them go, oh, this is too big. And Star Wars is sort of at that point in a similar way. If you look at all the comics that came out and the books that came out, if you're going to read one, you kind of feel like you want to read as much as you can, but you don't want to dumb it down. That's what I'm saying. There are sort of two tracks going on with Star Wars. One, to make it as reader-friendly, as user-friendly, as welcoming as possible to new people coming in. But then to people who've been in and around it for a long time, you don't want to dismiss their deep dive nature of, I want to know more about this. I want to know about the history of this planet, that sector, this storyline, that timeline, that ancient Sith Lord that we saw in a comic 30 years ago. I want to know more about him. You don't want to feel like that's just been parked forever. So I think they do have to sort of try and please as many people as they can. In my head, the Star Wars history is going back millennia before this.
I can remember talking about this on Cannon Fodder with Brian and yourself and Matt, that actually when we first heard of it being called the High Republic and this whole idea of like, Knights of the Republic and all that, we assumed it was going to be set a lot earlier into the galactic kind of timeline than it is. Because actually, to me, I was like, well, 200 years doesn't seem that very long in the grand scheme of things, and it's kind of not. And I think they probably could have quite easily have set it 500 years, and at least from what I've read so far, nothing would really be any different. And in fairness, it gives it even more space, so you could fit stuff in running up to for Phantom Menace and all that. But at the same time, I can understand maybe they said it close, but not too close to the prequels, so that then still leaves however long you've got. And because they haven't stated the age of the Old Republic in all its different guises, like with Dawn of the Jedi, you could go back 2,500 years easily, and you can do that, and then you could drop in your other bits and bobs along the way, because that is a problem that I guess we just have, because everybody's so fond, and that's us as fans and readers, as also I think the authors and the publicists are keen to focus on that original trilogy era and around the films. Obviously, that is why things are getting so kind of condensed and chock-a-block, and like you said, nobody's really kind of nailing down exactly when events are happening. And I guess that's just to make the canon aspect as fluid and convenient as possible, but at the same time, it means that it's very easy to then be able to squeeze another story in if you need to.
My perspective is completely and utterly selfish. I'm totally thinking of myself on this one, because you go back to things like the Atlas and the Essential Chronology, and because it built over all those iterations of the comics and all the different things that we got through certainly the 80s, but especially the 90s, as it built, and it built really nicely. And I think, to me, again, I talk about the book all the time, the culmination was the Essential Atlas. That's where it really coalesced into something that felt very grand, because you had a sense of geography and a sense of chronology. When people talk about canon, to me, it's all about chronology. It all happens. It's where and when did it happen? And that's what nails it down. That's what makes Star Wars feel like a place to me. When I read a comic and they go, Planet Blob in the Outer Rim, that means nothing to me. The Outer Rim, it's like saying, on the M25. Where on the M25? Clockwise or anti-clockwise? You know what I mean? It's too spurious a phrase to give any definition to it. So that frustrates. But I get that if you're coming into Star Wars, a hell of a lot of people coming into Star Wars couldn't give a stuff where the planet is. Doesn't matter when it's set. They just want to read the story. So, you could put a lot of effort into pleasing old farts like me, when really you should be putting all the effort into telling a great story. I get that. It's complete selfishness on my behalf, that I want to know when things are set, and I want to know where things happen, because I dig that aspect of Star Wars. That's not what lights a lot of people's fires or floats their boats or whatever you want to say. So I do get that. This is utter selfishness on my behalf, but I like the fact that they have sort of split it into these 6 sections, because it does give you look at the original trilogy era now, and it's not just Star Wars Empire and Jedi anymore. It does encompass Rogue One is part of that, Rebels is part of that, Solo kind of just touches on it, but I think that's in the previous era, Reign of the Empire era, which again is great. Bad Batch is going to sit in there because it's Fall of the Republic, Jedi Purge, all that sort of stuff. I like the phrases they've used to define this, and as the more content we get, the more books we get, the bigger these fill out, and I hope they stick with it, because go back to what you said about before Yavin and after Yavin, all the old chronologies from back in the day that people like Jason Fry would use in his Planet's Guide, and Pablo and all those people would use. Brian Cameron did a fantastic timeline way back when, that people would use to define when things were set. I co-opted the timeline gold for my own stuff when I was doing fan fiction, and everything was X amount of years BBY before Yavin, ABY after Yavin. It's useful to sort of set when things are, but yeah, it's not essential. This for the wider reading public that doesn't need the nitty gritty is more than enough, really.
That all makes sense to me. So my question to you, because I think some people can be quite fluid about this kind of stuff, and kind of like you said, just kind of roll with it because they're more concerned with the stories. And obviously there are fans who are more concerned about nailing down the minutiae, nailing down the planets and locales and all that kind of stuff. To you then, are we approaching a time when the current timeline, let's say the current Skywalker saga timeline, so everything that encompasses from Phantom Menace through to Rise of Skywalker, are we encroaching times when possibly the events and the timeline's getting too compact and there's too busy? And if so, what could we do? What options are there for the creators to be able to create more space?
That's a great question. And you could argue they did that already when they relegated Legends to sort of side canon, if you like. In terms of the characters, you said it earlier, funny enough, in relation to something else. You've got people of our age, I know it's a bit of an age difference, but people of our age are probably primarily going to be interested in the original trilogy. And you go back another 10 years, they're probably going to be more focused on the prequels because that's where they came in. You go another 10 years before that, they're probably going to be focused on the sequel trilogy. So everyone's got their hook and their entry point. You came in on Droids, which I consider original trilogy. You know what I mean? So everyone's got that angle. People of my age probably got another 20, 30 years of being fans before they go to the old Spaces home. And eventually, as the cast, sadly, move on, so will that era of the fandom. It's happened with Star Trek. I keep mentioning Trek, but it's the best analogy you can make, really. That older original series fandom who were teenagers in the 60s, they're all in their 70s and 80s now. A lot of them aren't around anymore. It's like World War II veterans. There won't be any left. There are hardly any left now. I remember World War I veterans as a kid. There's none of them left now. So, that era moves on and it really does get relegated to history. And at some point, the original trilogy and the fandom that surrounded it, the Beatlemania that it had, will just be a memory. It won't be present anymore like it is now. I could talk about it all day. God knows I do. But you know what I mean? It's not something that people alive will actually remember. And so the OT won't be the central point. Luke, I Am Your Father is kind of the key to all of Star Wars, or people seem to think. It'll move away from being that. It'll move to something else. And I think that time period right now, yes, it's a guaranteed seller. You really, General Giant have just released a beautiful new Leia statue sitting in the prison set. It's gorgeous. Yeah. Things like that, they will sell. They released stuff from the sequel trilogy, didn't sell as well because it was being aimed at a different age group. And we keep saying it, there's that age group when you get into your 30s and your 40s, you might be halfway through your mortgage. Kids have grown up a bit. You got a bit more disposable income. You got a bit more time in your hands. Technology's moved forward now. We've all got mobile phones. We've all got satellite television. We've all got access to all this stuff. If you want to start buying silly Star Wars stuff, you actually can. And so if you're going to buy stuff, for the most part, there's collectors who are going to try and get everything or as much as they can. But then there's some people who are just, I'm here for the nostalgia. There's that awesome new Han Solo Hoth archive figure, 50th anniversary Lucasfilm figure. That'll sell out like crazy because people will see that and they'll want it because it'll just remind them of their childhood. There's going to be an ebb and a flow with the fandom as well as with the stories. And you're right, that original trilogy era could really get jam-packed, which is why I think it's a great idea to do the High Republic. I think it's been fairly well received from what I've seen. Actually, more than that, very well received. Sales have gone great. A lot of the Jedi went in at #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list, and it was the fastest selling Star Wars book that Del Rey UK have had so far, which is really impressive. Yeah. They've launched hard and fast there, and I think you'll probably see more stuff like this. I still think of Shadows of the Empire when I think of High Republic. I know it's a silly comparison because that was one story, but that back in the day felt, because we weren't getting films, we didn't know that the special editions were coming. We knew that prequels were coming, but they were still a few years away. But Shadows felt like an event, and High Republic feels like an event, and they've marketed it very well. And they've got the new show starts this Wednesday coming, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, on Cannon Fodder. Great that they're doing things like this to highlight and promote the High Republic. I think you'll get more of that. But to your point, I'm rambling, but to your point, I think they probably will. They might go back that 500 years, like you said earlier. You look at the old timeline, nothing was happening 200 years before Star Wars. Nothing. Chewie was born.
That was it. I think, 3PO, Chewie, and Yoda. Pretty
much. That was it. It was a real dead spot in the timeline. I went back and looked when they said 200 years, and I was like, there's really nothing going on. So it's a clever place to put it. But bear in mind, that's the old Legends chronology, and they drop it into a spot when nothing was happening. Even when we had all the crazy stories when a comic would come out and somebody would go and drop it into the, usually fan chronology, they'd go and drop it in, because that's all we ever had. Lucasfilm never gave us that deep dive chronology. I wish they had, and I still hope they do. That stood out to me that they would drop it in that time spot. But I think, they could go back 500 years. If this works, if people connect to this, maybe they will jump ahead after Force Awakens era and after the First Order Resistance War. Maybe that's where they'll take it. I think that's a few years off, but they've got to be careful not to overpopulate, because goodness knows, I can't imagine them being able to tell many more stories in the Clone Wars era, because that is jam-packed, even in the canon era. If you go back before that, it's absolutely crammed and glorious for it. I'm not knocking it. It's great. Yeah, they've got to be careful they don't have it so, Luke Skywalker's just popped to the toilet and has an adventure. It's like the Forces of Destiny episodes when they're flying to Acto and they have a little side adventure. It's just it's fun, but
that's just it, exactly, isn't it? And that's also, I guess, the risk partly with keeping Marvel Comics or comics in general as part of their official canon, is because obviously every week there is a new adventure. A bit like this podcast recording. Every week that we sat down to hit record and record a podcast, it's like a whole new adventure. At least for me, anyway, it's always an education. So,
well, you never never know where you're going to go with it. We always go off on tangents, don't we? We definitely go off on tangents.
Absolutely. Tangents are good. But I tell you what, we're running a bit long, so let's think about wrapping this one up. But if the good listeners of those, there are many, I've been told.
Oh, yes.
If anybody has got a question and wants to ping it over, or just want to weigh in on some of the kind of stories we talked about this week, you're more than welcome to. We love and enjoy reading your thoughts and opinions. And if you want to get in touch, Mark's going to be able to tell you how you can do it.
I certainly am. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, and we do try and cover everything, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Like Mark just says, we're out of questions and we love talking, answering, rabbiting, riffing, whatever on Star Wars stuff. So send in your questions. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe. Leave a review, please. A 5-star one would be lovely. On Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. And be sure to watch Good Morning Tatooine, our weekly news show, live on Fantha Tracks Facebook every Sunday evening at 9 o'clock GMT, that's UK time, and later on Fantha Tracks TV on YouTube, and then embedded on the site. Happy anniversary, Mark. 1 year. Can't believe it's been 1 year. It's been fun all the way. I've loved it. So thank you.
Thank you, mate. I've enjoyed it as well. So, thank you for having me. And I guess thank you to everybody who's listened for putting up with me. So, I'm not planning on going anywhere. Roll on to the next episode. So, everybody stay safe. Remember, don't eat yellow snow. And we'll catch you at the next episode.
Don't eat yellow snow. Just turn it into snowballs and throw it at people you don't like.
Absolutely.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
You're listening to episode 74 of Talking Bollocks, the only Star Wars podcast dedicated to the Han Solo trilogy by Brian Daly. My name's Mark Mulcaster, and I am joined, as always, by Mr. Mark Newbold. How was that?